Welcome to the AfterWords podcast, where every week we spend some time with the teachers from the previous weekend talking about their message, talking about the passage of scripture that they covered, and sometimes we even get to uncover some things that didn't make it into the message. My name is Jason, and today I am joined by Tony. Tony, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Great. You taught at the Westside venue this weekend. It was great. Hezekiah, how are you doing?
Great.
Yeah. I saw Tony on some security film footage that you taught at the Riotown venue.
Yep.
There's no other evidence that happened, but I promise you that it really did happen. So, yeah. So I feel really bad every time we bring you on the podcast, and I'm like, Hezekiah had an amazing message that none of you will get to listen to unless you were there. Yeah, you do need to be there. That is a good reason to visit the Riotown venue once in a while. But we are working on troubleshooting that. So there's a small chance we might be able to salvage it for the audio part. We're going to see what we can do. And if you were at the Holt venue, Kyle Rodriguez from Union Church, I think all of those things are true, was the teacher. And we are working on a special bonus episode with him later this week. So stay tuned for that. So he wasn't able to join us in person. So we're going to see what we can do. So we are finally at week 10 of the 10 Commandments. It feels like it has been a very long time.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the 10 Commandments. It's been good. And every week I think to myself, oh, now we're at the one that feels like it's like the big one. And we got to the 10th one and I realized that there is almost like this reverse order, not necessarily of seriousness. I'm not going to get into how you could weight them. I think we would all agree the first one is the one that they're all built on. But this last one really seems like it just cuts right to the heart of the matter, literally, right? And Tony, you said this explicitly, and Hezekiah, you talked about this, and so I kind of want to start here. It's sort of like, do not covet or don't want things that belong to someone else. It's sort of the heart of a lot of these other sins that are talked about in the commandments. And Tony, you literally said that. This is the one that if you are coveting after someone else's wife, you're much more likely to end up in adultery, or if you're, or someone's stuff, like stealing. And I just was thinking, as you were thinking about how you wrap up this message on the last of the 10 Commandments, what was going through your mind in terms of how this one really plays into that?
Yeah, I think for me it was, it wasn't easy by any means, but it was something that there is so much that people could see themselves in, with this message. And I kind of said that in my intro. I think there's been some moments for me in the 10 Commandments where I've thought okay, I think I'm doing okay. I don't, this one's real severe. I don't think I've really done that, and this one is just, I even kind of had this in one of my earlier drafts of just, this is something that maybe you committed before you got to church today, or you're in church and you have a covetous heart towards those kids are so well behaved, or you could just, it's so ubiquitous and all encompassing. And because it is a heart posture and because it is internal, it's just, I think we're so much more prone to it. And I did say that in the message, that it is very all encompassing, how this is the first thing that you do that often leads you to breaking another one. So,
yeah. Hezekiah, how about you? As you were looking at, we've come to the end of this, and it does sort of seem like this one both wraps up all the other ones and kind of leads to them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, it's just been interesting going through each of the commandments. I think even just as a teacher, figuring out the depth of each one, it has its own depth. And then of course this one is it's crazy because it's arguably between this one and the first one, they're pretty related, almost like a gateway type of sin to breaking the rest of them. I think it was just interesting to dive into. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think neither of you brought this up specifically, but I actually kept thinking of the story of David. And it's he saw Bathsheba and he wanted Bathsheba, which led him to commit adultery, which then led him to commit bear false witness, which then led him to murder. It is shocking how quickly this particular sin can, and so it makes sense why it's on this list, right? Yeah. It's and one of the things when Noel and I were talking about not bearing false witness, that commandment was not just don't lie. It's a specific type of lying. And so there is and the reason for that was that their entire system of justice in the law would not function if people weren't honest about as witnesses. Yeah. And in this, there is certainly you shouldn't want things that belong to someone else because society can't function if you just go around taking things. But Hezekiah, you talked about specifically, this isn't about behavior, right? Yeah. Adultery, in the New Testament, Jesus expands the commandment to a heart condition. But in the law, literally, it's like, don't do this thing.
Yeah.
Don't commit murder. Don't do adultery. Don't steal. But this one is like, guard your heart, right? Yeah. And I'm just curious, like, what was that surprising to you as you were studying this? Like, this one is different, it feels like.
Yeah, I think like when you just like first view especially if you like grew up in church or something, it's just like, oh yeah, 10 Commandments, like do not steal, do not covet, like
don't do this. Don't do this.
I already have an idea, yeah, don't do this. But then it's almost like this was like his aha, like you can't get away from this one. You know what I'm saying? Like this is like, I think that's why Jesus brings that out, because it's like you really can't like like this is the one thing that I think everybody's guilty of, and it's just like you guys can't be perfect. You can't fulfill all the other ones. Be like, yeah, I could see that guy's following that pretty good, but you don't know what's going on in their heart. And so I think that really hits deep with it hit deep with the Israelites. It hits deep with us today. So it was yeah.
Well, and I'm curious for both of you, like this one. So obviously, the 10th commandment we're talking about, don't covet, and it lists some examples of those things, and they're very specific, but I feel like they're also meant to sort of paint a picture so that anybody who is reading that is like, oh, but it's fine if I just want this. And God's like, no, actually, I am talking about the donkey, or I am talking about this. But this is the one that you can't see, right? Because it is purely a heart thing. And so, Tony, you said like this is one that probably will be you committed before you came to church. It's like because it doesn't require you to take something. It doesn't require you to do, but it does. It's like a thing that happens in our heart. And one of the things like I think it could be confusing for people. Is there a difference between seeing a thing that people have and be like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to have that? Having like natural desire, like we all grew up in America, like the pursuit of the American dream, the pursuit of accomplishment and success, and obviously we look to other people who have accomplished those things. Where's the line between that kind of as a motivation and coveting?
Yeah, I think because there's actually somebody after church that came up to me and was just like, "Hey, I just want to like clarify because it's like." I looked at your shoes up there and I was like, man, those are some nice shoes. Like, is that coveting? And I was like, no, I think what the line is again, it's wanting something that's not yours. Now, if you like look, you could look at something, admire it, and that's in a healthy way, and it can motivate you to get a pair of shoes like that, or get that job, or be successful. And those are good. There's healthy ways to desire. And that's why I brought up like the
you talked
Hebrew.
About it. Yeah,
the Hebrew word is like literally used in other places in positive ways. Even God using it, like he's desiring this, and so desiring is not bad. It's when you're like, I want that, like I want those shoes off of your feet right now. Like that's when it's becomes an issue. It's where it's becomes you have those clouded thoughts of sinful thoughts of like I'll take it, or I'll do whatever I can to get that exact thing. I think that's when those desires become or I want that person's wife, I want that person's that specific thing. But there is a healthy kind of desire. I think that's where the line is if you could see yourself having hate in your heart towards somebody because of something they have, that jealousy or envy comes up, or, you're maybe you're just greedy and you want this, like that's when, it's just like a heart check of like, is this, I think it's always good to just, step back and be like, I don't know, am I coveting this? Like, but I think there are healthy ways to desire things.
Yeah. And Tony, you kind of drew the line at this idea of discontentment, right? And I really liked the direction in your message where you sort of described coveting as like the fruit of discontentment in our lives. It's like when we are not satisfied or content with where we're at, that's when we start to look at these other things and to desire those in an unhealthy way. And it feels like that's similar to what Hezekiah was just saying. Like, is that right? That like the idea of desire becomes coveting when it leads to discontentment, or?
Yeah. So I would say that discontentment is the fruit of a covetous heart. I think I would kind of flip what you said.
That's great.
And I think that if a person was experiencing that dissatisfaction in life, I think that's kind of how I defined it, of just like, I am just dissatisfied with who I am, with what I have, with where I'm going. I think that person, if they were to do like what Hez was saying, some deeper heart work, they would probably be able to find like a posture of just coveting, of just like overvaluing things of this world, undervaluing things of God and like the truths of Scripture. And so, I connected those two because I do think they are very connected. And I think it's really important to do what you're saying, because we can't not have desires, And I think God made us all unique. Like the fact that one person was like, I really like your shoes, like someone else may be like, I didn't even notice them, you know what I mean? And so that's like unique to how God made us. And so God's not saying don't have desire, you know what I mean? But I do think this is when we put just too much stock, too much emphasis on gifts over giver. And I think even like listening to what Hez just said there, it's interesting how this goes beyond just your view of material things. It affects your view of people, because it doesn't just stop with, I really want what that person has. It gets into this heart posture of, why do they even have it? Like they shouldn't have it. Who are they? And it's like, it's so crazy how this skews your view of people, other image bearers of God like you. And you elevate yourself, not just from the material wealth side, but from like a personhood thing. And that's why I think this is just such a pervasive and challenging sin of the heart.
Yeah. You said that it devalues the things of God and overvalues material things. That's not an exact quote, but that was sort of like the way you were explaining it. And you also referred to like the C.S. Lewis quote where he's talking about like our deepest desires are pointing to us to something beyond this world. And I feel like, I wonder if it's like, it's hard for us, I believe, because we know based on Scripture and we know based on our faith that like we weren't made for this world. We were made for something else. We were made for like an eternal life in heaven, but none of that feels tangible to us right now. But what does feel tangible to us is like scrolling the Instagram feed and seeing the stuff. And I think even though we all understand like, yeah, I think the jig is up, like Instagram life is not real life. Like we all understand that that's not really like the situation for a lot of people. It's just like the most cultivated, best version of something, but it's still the thing that we see all the time. And so I'm just like curious for both of you, how do you guard your hearts? And like, how do you suggest to other people, like, how do we shift our focus? It's almost like the Colossians, like since then you were, like focus your heart on things above, not on earthly things. Like how do you pastor people through that? Like,
yeah, I think, so to first answer your question for myself, like I am just personally not a big social media user. And I think part of it is that.
Might be a valuable life lesson. Right
well,
there, just
no,
for people.
I'm not like, I don't go as far as saying that no one should use social media. That's a personal decision for me, because I've found that the more I use it, just the more discontent it makes me.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually increase my contentment. And so, at the end of the day, it's really a value add conversation with myself of like, is this making me love God more, be more content with what He's given me? And it's most of the time it's no. And so for me, just a general practice for my own life is I don't use a lot of social media. But I do think that there's a correlation to like, you can apply this to anything. For people who just are obsessed with a sports team, that person knows everything about every player on the sports team. It's like, it could be a great thing, but like, that is what they go through their day thinking about. That's what they've committed themselves to knowing. And those people I think tend to be more, when their team wins, oh, it's great. When their team doesn't win, leave them alone. So it's all wrapped up kind of in who you are. And so you can kind of do that with anything. And I think that, for me, it's really good to have people in my life that I'm talking to about it, or people in my life that know me well enough to be able to say like, that really seemed to bother you, or you really seem to be talking a lot about this or that. And it's not always like sinful things, but it can just be like things of this world. It's like, you really seem focused on that. And it's like, I think good to have people who know you and who know like your habits and how you live and can like speak into your life. So I think accountability and community is really great for this, but also just doing kind of a check of, are my habits life-giving and are they making me love God more, love people more? And I think sometimes it's they don't, and it's worth changing those.
Yeah, I think for me, I think that's why Paul talks a lot about Thanksgiving too. You know, again, going back to the discontentment, it's easy to get discontent seeing a bunch of things, you know, even in like ministry of like seeing like, oh, that person is, you know, preaching there, or that, you know, this person's got a bigger church, or this, you know, like I think a lot of, you know, people can fall into that. And I think that's why Thanksgiving, like that practice is so important, of just like, that's what I do. I have like a little journal that I have every day. I can like look back, and then for the week of just like, what am I grateful for this week? You know, just seeing those little things of just like, man, this is going good. This is going good. And not like that comparison with other people, you know, but, yeah. So for me, that's that. Yeah, I think that's a good practice for people that I recommend people to do, is just like be grateful to see what you're grateful for. Cause I think it's easy to see like, oh, I don't have that. But easy to miss like what you do have, you know, even if the little things, you know, being healthy, you know, waking up in the morning, having a house over your head, you know, like all those things are big things that a lot of people don't have. And so, yeah, I think that's a good like anecdote to discontentment. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy too, Hez, because I talked about this briefly in my message. It's just like when you set your heart on things that other people have, it creates a contempt for the things you do have. You know what I mean? Like you like, I think one of the greatest things for a covetous person is like forcing yourself to write down things that you are grateful for, because like that is reassigning this like, oh yeah, like I don't deserve this. This is such a blessing to me. And the fact that I woke up today, that is a blessing to me. Yeah. And so what are you doing in that moment? You are looking at what God has given you and who you are and what he's blessed you with. You're not looking elsewhere. And so, if there's one thing, you know, or a few things people would like, if they're like, this is really connecting with me, I really want this to change, I think write down 3 things every day you're grateful for.
You know, one of the things I love about that is I think we often think, because this idea like of coveting something someone else has, it's sort of like this deep, intense feeling we have about the thing. And you talked about like, it's not just I want the thing. It's like, but why do they get to have it? Like we have this like, and it becomes consuming to us. And what I think a lot of times we don't think about is that we have control over those feelings by the way we think about those things, right? If you are looking at your neighbor as based on their relationship with God and the fact that they were made in the image of Christ, it changes the way you think about his wife, right? Because you're not just looking at, you're not just being subsumed by your feelings. You can, and I think a lot of times it's like, yeah, but it's not fair, but I don't have it, or my life's terrible, but why does Hezekiah get to do this? And like, you know, like there was someone on Sunday who said something to me, like Tony had asked some of us like a series of questions. It's like, whose house would you want to have or whatever? And I had done the music at the West Side, and someone's like, oh, I really wish that, you know, I could play like Jason. I'm like, no, I promise that's not what should be on your list. Like Hezekiah, maybe you should be like, but when you think about that, like, the way we think about those things, we allow ourselves to be dictated by our feelings, when really what you two are saying is like, no, change the way you think about that. Change the way you think about your blessings, and that'll change the way you feel about those things. Is that right? Is that what you guys are kind of getting at?
Yeah, and that's I think I talked about this, but like that's why I think a lot of people think contentment is just like this false positive mindset of like just forcing yourself to endure, to bear it. I'm good with what I have. I'm good with, you know, just telling yourself over. No,
white knuckle it.
Patient in affliction.
Yeah. No, it's like it really is a trust in God and His provision. You know, it's really just being content with Jesus, you know, wherever you're at. And I think that really changes like how you see things and how you interact with others. You know, you're just like, you know, again, that's why I think desires aren't bad in general. It's okay to look at someone and be like, man, he's got a nice house. What did he do to do that? You know, I want to try to, you know, work hard and get that too. But I also trust Jesus with what I have right now, and I'm going to steward what I have right now well. And, you know, that's contentment is trusting Jesus and His, you know, and, you know, God, His provision for us, you know, and when you're discontent, it really is like a distrust in God and His provision for us. It's like what you have for me isn't enough, or you're not enough. You know?
Well, and that's where I think the example of Paul in Philippians, where you read that whole letter and you get to the point where he's talking about, I know what it's like to be brought low. I know what it's like to abound, you know? And it's like we've got that verse, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, that we just isolate and we like put everywhere. You know what I mean? But then and again, it's a beautiful verse, but man, it is so much more beautiful in context.
Right.
Like Paul's in prison writing that. And right before that, he's like, look, I had everything. I mean, I was like a Jewish ruler.
And he like calls it rubbish compared to knowing Jesus.
Yeah. And so I don't know if you can ever read the Bible and think that like, you know, Paul wasn't really like a really passionate guy. Like, I mean, that guy, he said things like, I would rather die than my Jewish brothers and sisters like die without Jesus. You know what I mean? You know, and so like he says these things hyperbolically in like in a way that's just like, I so badly want people to know Jesus. And so that guy, like he had Christ and nothing compared, and he said it and he lived it. And so I think like one of the, like when I was reading and studying this topic, like it kept coming back to Philippians of just like contentment and has a lot like what you're saying of just, if you have Jesus, you can be content in this life. I mean, truly.
Yeah. Hezekiah, you talked about, and I thought this was really good. I thought all of it was really good on the security cam footage that I got to watch, and I read the message too, this really stuck out to me that essentially you were talking about how sin never starts with the action. It always starts in our heart, right? And so set that aside for just a second. The other thing that occurred to me about this particular commandment, because we're talking about like you Tony, you told the story of, or was it you were talking about a friend who had to drive through a neighborhood and he sees all these huge houses. And I think it's worth distinguishing. Coveting isn't driving through that neighborhood thinking these houses are amazing. I wish I lived in one of these houses. It's, I want that guy's house, right? Like it's coveting the thing that somebody else has. And so I feel like it's sort of like, it is so easy and such a slippery slope though, from this is amazing to I should have this. Then that starts to fester in our hearts, which starts to lead to sin. And I'm just curious, like, how do we help people to like cut that off? Like to have a moment of self-awareness to go, yeah, I'm headed down a really bad path here. Right. Because again, up until that point, you haven't robbed the guy's house. You haven't dragged him out of the thing and taken his keys. Like but it's starting to fester and it can lead to so much. So I'm just like curious, like, how do we help people?
I mean, I think like anything, as quick as you can try and rid that. And so, I mean, so in that example, like, I think a great thing would be like, you see it and then you think, how can I immediately like refocus my attention on God? Or just like, man, how cool is God that he made people that can make really sweet houses like that? You know, and I'm not saying that flippantly. I'm truly saying that like, okay, you know, your heart is going to go to this place where you are going to elevate yourself and you were going to devalue someone else and you're going to devalue God. So what if you just flipped that? What if in that moment you just did everything you could to like value God and like, wow, God, how cool is it that you made us in this world that was just so unique and crazy, and like that a person made that with their skills and you made that person, you know what I mean? And so I actually think it's like as quickly as you can pivot, it's like and I think it's a discipline. I mean, I think in Philippians 2, Paul's like, I have learned the secret. It wasn't like Paul woke up one day and was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to do any work. It's like, it's a discipline, you know? And that's where I think this is also like a spiritual discipline of like, I am going to cast my eyes and heart upward in those moments where I want to think about me and what I don't have. And I think the quicker you can start to do that, I think it maybe could become habit and it's like, oh, it's easier to do that, you know, but I really think it is something that people have to be intentional with, and they're not going to like stumble into that. I do think it's got to be intentional as a posture, and like how quickly you do that is just going to happen the more that you do it over time.
Yeah. I think bringing it to the light. That's why I said I think this is like one of the most dangerous sins, because it's nobody else can see it. Right. You know, like you could literally walk around coveting somebody's wife or husband, or, you know, somebody's things and have like hate and jealousy in your heart, and you could interact with those people and they wouldn't even know it.
Right.
And that's what makes it dangerous. So I think like bringing those things to the light, and I think like we try to downplay it because nobody else can see it. So we're like, it's all right, if I think this way. And again, that's dangerous because it starts to grow and it starts to fester. And then eventually it does come out. Like people that, stories of people in adultery, like it doesn't just happen like one time. They just see this person. It's like the next day it happens. No, it starts with you seeing them every day at work, then you go and, those thoughts are growing. Then you're having conversations with them. Oh, and then you get their number. And then, then you're going over their house, after work. Oh, and then, and eventually you're just like stuck in the cycle of sin that you just got so deep into, all because of that coveting, thoughts, So I think it's exposing it, being open with your brothers and sisters about it, that's why Jesus says, if your right hand causes you sin, like cut it off. Like, if your eye, gouge it out, like
right.
it's like you should expose it so people know about it so you can be held accountable for it too.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago when Noel and I were on the podcast about adultery of like, do not wait for someone to ask you.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't wait till you're caught.
Right.
It's just so
like,
far late.
If you're feeling like, Hez, you just painted a picture there. If like as early in that process as you can, trust the Lord and like go to someone, confess it to God, confess it to someone else of like, I really feel like I'm sinning here. And so, and if you just, because we've seen and counseled people of just like, if there was just someone else with you that you were walking with before it all went to like step 10, you know what I mean? It wouldn't have gotten there because it just, when you confess, like there is so much like blessing and like God, like he can really serve someone when they do that. And so it's one of those things where it's like, don't wait for someone to ask you or to ask you the magic question. You seem discontent. Are you coveting something? It's just walk with your brothers and sisters in Christ and live open and transparent lives with one another. And, that's such a blessing that we forego, I think, when we're living this way.
Yeah. Again, that's why Jesus made it a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure people were listening and like, getting called out, getting convicted when Jesus was talking about that, because he's like, oh, I'm not committing adultery. He was like, no, if you lust in your heart with them, you're already having these thoughts, you're an adulterer, because it's that serious, because it's that, you're already doing it in your head. Like eventually it's just going to come out, it's already consuming your heart. And so, Jesus makes a big deal about it for a reason.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know where I heard this or if I read it one time, so I can't give credit, but at some point I heard someone say like that as a rule, just never give sin any oxygen, right? Because it's a fire that will consume you. So you like, if you try to eliminate all the sparks, like that's just not realistic. We are humans and we're fallen. But what you can do is not give that sin any oxygen, anywhere to grow, anything else to consume. And so like in this particular case, it can be really easy, I think, to think like, well, this is just a thing happening in my head. It's not affecting anyone. And even if you're coveting someone's wife and it never leads to adultery, there are still very real consequences in your heart, the condition of your own heart, your own marriage relationship. Like if you're coveting someone's Hezekiah's shoes, even if you never steal his shoes, there's still this brokenness now in that relationship. And you may never know about it, but like it is you give that thing oxygen and then that fire goes to other places, right? And it just feels like this is one of those things that would be so easy to ignore or to overlook, but all sin leads to death, right? Like, and we may not think that it's that serious, but like, there's a reason it's there.
And
right?
that's why it ruins relationships too.
Yeah.
People who are discontent are not fun to be around. Like you will know, like they're bitter people, and those aren't like, again, it ruins your witness too, even just with coveting, you're not pleasant to be around. Nobody wants to be around that, so like it's a big deal that way, and how, people perceive, you and, perceive the church in general.
Yeah. And Jason, that quote, that illustration you shared, I heard a quote from Luther years ago that's like really stuck with me. He wrote that you can't control the birds flying over your head, but you can keep them from building nests in your hair. It's the same thing, of like the birds are going to fly over your head some days and you're going to be like, well, there's so many birds today. You know what I'm saying? But you can brush them out of your hair.
Yeah.
And or that's where a brother and sister in Christ be like, it looks like you got some nests up there, man, with like with how discontent you're feeling. And so that's where it's just, to not just heap ourselves with shame on those days when there's birds everywhere, but to really like have brothers and sisters in our life that are like doing checks for us and like that we're talking about it with, I think is really important when it comes to this in particular.
Yeah, nothing sucks the oxygen out of sin like talking to someone, right? Right. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. So is there anything that either of you didn't get a chance to talk on kind of as we wrap up that you would love to sort of just finish up here?
For me, it's one of those, we're at kind of a unique pivot point in Exodus. And so whenever we kind of move to a different place, or so for example, like Jason, you were saying, we've spent 10 weeks here in Exodus 20.
Yeah.
And so it's felt like we have kind of, if you were like on a hike, we were hiking at a good clip and now we're like crawling because we needed to.
Which is how I hike, but yeah.
But now we're going to be moving faster through the narrative again, which is cool. So I think I would have liked to sum up the commandments maybe a little bit more, just to kind of end this section. But again, it's not a bad thing. But I also think too, we were kind of even in this podcast, just realizing like, oh my gosh, like Jesus talked about the heart so much.
Yeah.
and just how like you could not hit every place in the scripture where he talks about coveting or the specific instances he corrects someone or calls them out of that. And so, there's always more you can do, but I think, if there was more opportunity to show the beauty and grace of Jesus in my sermon, I would have cherished that opportunity to do that. But thankful that we spent the time that we did in this part of Exodus. And I'm really thankful for how we did it. I think it was really great to do one commandment a week and to really hit them exhaustively so that now we can continue through the book.
Yeah. And for context, I want to hear Hezekiah yours, but we spent 29 weeks going through the first 20 chapters of Exodus, and we're going to spend 5 weeks going through the last 20 chapters of Exodus. So it's going to be, get ready to run the rest of the way up this hill.
Time to sprint, finish that race.
Hezekiah, anything else from you?
I want to talk more about the story of Anastasia coveting my chicken wings.
Yeah. I was curious if there was any bearing false witness happening there. I don't know.
I don't want to get too deep into, those personalities. Now, I really want to just, if I had time, there's like so much you could talk about. Again, I think the same thing as Tony, like wrapping up the 10 Commandments, setting up the rest of what happens in Exodus, and then, the effects of coveting, in relationships with others, why that's important and how it ruins that and affects that. I think there was a whole lot that I had to, that's what makes it hard. You only get 32 minutes, 32.
Well, yeah, that's great. And I appreciate both of you taking the time as we wrap up the 10 Commandments and as we get ready to race through the rest of the book of Exodus. And we appreciate all of you who are listening, and we will talk to you again next week.